Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Bill Little. I'm with a firm called Orchestra BioMed, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating today's session about raising capital and liquidity and where is it going to come from. And what I thought I would do before asking our panelists each to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their individual funds is just give you some context on the overall market. And I think most of us, if asked, would suggest that the last couple of years in capital markets have been really tough, no doubt about it. And we had a pre-call as a group, and one of the things we talked about is how do we think it's looking forward? And so today we're going to talk a little bit about what we think it looks like moving forward. And also about alternative ways of potentially raising capital. First, before we kick off, I'd like to once again thank the LSI team. From my perspective, this meeting has become the meeting of record for investors and strategics, and of course, startups. And the ecosystem that Scott and his team have helped to create and now lead really is integral to where we're going as an ecosystem. And there's no doubt about it, there's never been a greater need for innovation in our ecosystem to help patients and to help healthcare systems, but also innovation in how we fund and how we get these great technologies to market. There are over 750 companies here at this LSI, and in speaking with Henry Peck last night at dinner, the alumni from LSI this year alone has raised over $1.6 billion just this year. And so was it pretty gloomy? Yeah, it was pretty gloomy. Is it looking better? I think it is. And so with that, to tee it up, I'd like to ask each of my panelists here to introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about your fund and introduce yourself to the audience. Michael, you want to go first?
Sure. So good morning, everybody. Michael Wasserman. My background, originally technical. I spent the first 7 or 8 years of my career as a medtech operator, entrepreneur, like many of you. I've now been investing for almost 25 years in medtech. The first couple of decades was with a group called HIG Capital, based in Miami. Now investing with Elevage, Patient Square Capital, which I'll tell you about. And I've spent the last 5 years being Alex Schmitz's personal assistant, where my responsibilities are bringing him his matcha latte and cutting grapes in thirds. So Patient Square is a healthcare private equity fund run by the former senior management team of KKR. We are currently investing out of a $4 billion Fund 1 across the healthcare spectrum, medtech diagnostics, life sciences tools. Elevage invests in venture and growth stage opportunities from early to mid-clinical all the way through commercial, putting about $50 million to work per investment.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Diana?
Sure. I also have a technical engineering background, MBA, a bit of management consulting and investment banking before starting my career in venture capital, and which is now 25 years of venture capital experience. I co-founded a venture capital company called 360 Capital, investing at a pan-European level, still active and raising funds and investing in all sectors. About 7-8 years ago, I felt I would want to focus on medtech investment opportunities as well as more broad life science scope, and co-founded with another 2 partners, co-founded Panakes, the fund I'm representing here. I'm still managing director with my co-founders, and run this company which has about 300 million under management. About 22 portfolio companies to date, and a lot of capital available for new investment. At Panakes, we do invest primarily in medtech, but also in biotech. Ticket size anything from 1 to 10 million. seed stage to pre-IPO round. We're pretty stage agnostic. Our sweet spot is Series A and Series B. And we look at everything, including not only proper medical devices, but including also diagnostic, IVD, digital health, a little bit more borderline in medtech, as well as biotech, as I mentioned.
Thanks.
And geographically speaking, that's mainly Europe, but we also go beyond Europe to US and elsewhere.
I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience here that have great ideas for you.
Thank you.
Alex,
I'm going to apply for Alex Schmitz available assistant
You don't want it.
position.
It doesn't pay well.
Alex Schmitz is with a firm called Endeavour.
Wow.
Perhaps you've heard of it. Alex, you want to go ahead and introduce
Absolutely. I've had the distinct pleasure of serving on a board with Michael, and I miss the lattes. That's all I can say. Alex Schmitz, a partner at Endeavour Vision. We're a transatlantic healthcare investor focused primarily on class 2, class 3 medical devices. We do selective digital health and diagnostic investments, but we're primarily focused on the more physician-mediated, reimbursed, highly regulated end of the device and digital spectrum. I'm originally from the States, but I've been here in Europe for the last 25 years, all of which I've spent working in venture and medtech last decade with Endeavour Vision, and prior to that in a biz dev strategy role at Biosensors International, which is an interventional cardiology and structural heart company headquartered out of Singapore, but I was in their Swiss headquarters or European headquarters in Switzerland. We invest mostly growth stage, so a little bit later than Diana and Panakes, Series B and later, mostly focusing on early revenue stage companies, helping them to accelerate commercialization, scale up, and in many instances kind of cross the Atlantic in either direction, either a European company commercializing in the U.S. or U.S. companies coming over to Europe. It's something that we've had a lot of experience with and like to help our companies with. We manage about $850 million and typically invest 15 to 20 million per initial investment. And that's all I got because Michael forgot to make my latte this morning, so I had to make do with it with a mediocre espresso.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. I'm Dave Kereiakes. Bill, thanks for including me, and thanks to the LSI team for another great event here. I'll try and be brief so we can get to the good stuff. I started investing in healthcare some 13, 14 years ago. Most recently, I helped run Providence Ventures, which is the investment and innovation arm for Providence Health, third largest nonprofit in the U.S., which was fascinating to be inside of a nonprofit as an investor and innovator. 180-year-old faith-based nonprofit, but really a lot of good learnings. A year and a half ago, I joined Windham as a co-managing partner as we're investing out of our fourth fund. Wyndham's been around over 15, 16 years. And uniquely, we have both managing partners have experience investing and operating in med tech as well as software and digital health, and then uniquely the convergence that we're seeing between those two fields. So tech-enabled devices, software that has regulatory risk and pulls unique clinical insight out of a particular procedure, either pre, intra, or post-op. So we invest 5 to 10 million, 10 to 15 over the life, and really try to add more value than the cost of the capital to really help influence these innovative companies that are solving a material problem. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Bill Little. I'm with a firm called Orchestra BioMed. My background is largely as an operator with firms like Boston Scientific, St. Jude Medical, and Abbott. For the past 4 years, I served as the chief operating officer of an Israeli U.S. firm called Neovasc that ended up being the first, last, and only acquisition that Shockwave Medical ever did. And now Shockwave is part of Johnson & Johnson. For the past year and a half, I've been here at Orchestra BioMed. And at Orchestra BioMed, fundamentally what we try to do is solve late-stage, high-dollar funding needs, typically for Class 3 devices, typically PMA-type programs that are on the front edge of $50, $80, $100 million type pivotal trials. We fund in partnership with a strategic partner in three-way deals where we allow the strategic to make an equity investment into Orchestra. We're publicly traded on the NASDAQ. They buy our stock. We take their cash. We take their cash and we put it towards funding the pivotal study. We add our own capital as well, and we keep it entirely off the balance sheet of the strategic. Upon FDA approval or whatever the milestone may be, the strategic will commercialize the device, and we take a long-term royalty on future sales. And so as part of the theme today, this idea of where's capital going to come from, I think one of the reasons that we at Orchestra were asked to be on this panel is this alternate funding vehicle. And I think if any of you have spoken with strategics, you'll hear very quickly about fear of dilution. And there's clinical risk, there's regulatory risk, and for many of the firms, dilution is the biggest hindrance. And so looking for ways to solve for that dilution problem is something that we're trying to do at Orchestra. So with that as a tee up, David, maybe I'll start with you. In our prep call, you brought up the concept of non-dilutive financing and other options. And can you give the group your perspective on how you guys look at that at Windham?
Sure. Yeah, so naturally, I view we all know there's two credit cards you can use, a debt credit card and an equity credit card. Unfortunately, both are very expensive right now and hard to get any credit on that line anywhere, particularly with a new investor coming in. I think a majority of the deals that are getting done are insider-led rounds, which are underreported, and so I think that number is actually a lot higher. When you try to get a new investor in because of funds focus on cash management and trying to make sure that their children inside their fund have the ability to survive, there is a fight for new capital to be placed. And having not made a new investment, if you ask a fund, very few have made an investment, a new one, in the last 12, 18, 24 months. And when you're outside of the market for that long, it's hard to know what fair market value is. And that's why we have these conversations about where valuation should be. And you hear a long range and you see some pretty onerous terms, is because that's something when we are not practicing or playing the sport that we are here to do, then it's hard to come out and start well and play well. So you have to start looking for other means. Unfortunately, I've been seeing a lot more distribution deals, which can jeopardize a competitive exit process. It may be helpful right now to get immediate revenue and see that growth, but you may not get credit for that revenue. And I'm happy to be longer-winded on that, on the ways that you can structure or evaluate those opportunities to help bring money in. Another credit card you can use is your customers, and pulling their cash up forward and having them prepay and maybe take less than the overall what you would get otherwise to get that cash up front. And then uniquely too, so I invested in a company called Boulder Surgical, and a surgical sealer and stapler in the pediatric space. We were growing it to go after adult, and we sold exclusivity in robotics, and were able to leverage tens of millions of dollars in non-dilutive funding that we were able to use in milestone payments and development payments, as well as royalties. And we were able to monetize that royalty stream and preserve a huge market opportunity where a lot of potential buyers were still ready and willing to look at us and leverage the tens of millions of dollars in our return and for equity preservation too. And so where equity is very expensive right now, I would start looking at other market opportunities. You constantly hear us say you have to focus, don't get distracted with all of these other applications. But if you have that opportunity, rather than get distracted, why not monetize it and give exclusivity in veterinary or robotics or a field of use? Yeah. So in this particular organ, you can use this and you can bring in 5, 10 in our case, tens of millions, and we still preserve the option to sell it and later did for a lot of money. So you have to get creative. And right now, just given the cost of capital, the cost of time, too, the time to talk to all of us and educate us and attract a new investor, time is your most limited resource. And if you can kick the can to a better financing environment, get additional milestones, you preserve your equity as entrepreneurs and your shareholders, the common stock that often gets hammered at this point in time or jeopardized. So,
Michael?
Yeah, can I just jump in and extrapolate a little bit on David's commentary, and coming at it from a little bit of a different perspective, because we're a newish fund, and not only having a fresh source of capital, which is a good problem to have, but also not having the anchor of an existing portfolio. And one of the things we've certainly seen, and I'm sure all of us on the panel have seen it over the past 12, 24, even 36 months, is a lot of the early stage companies that were financed in 2019 through 2021 did so at valuations that one would argue in a median perspective would be higher than expected. And obviously that puts an added stress.
You're being too polite.
Well, I was talking about your portfolio.
There was a bubble.
There was a bubble.
And everything was priced like it was a bubble, and it was overpriced. And that was true across the board of the economy, not just in our little pond. And I know you know that, but I just want to make the point and not dance around it. Things were overpriced in the last cycle.
And that's when you get into the unfortunate intricacy of the dynamics around our partnerships, right? Where, you do a deal at $50 million in 2019, and then you got to go back to your partners, forget about the management teams involved in this, and say, well, the next round's going to be done at $25 million.
Yeah.
And what that's led to, and this is what David was alluding to, a number of inside rounds because you're kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
And certainly from our experience, I'd be interested if others have seen the same. You can probably do that once, maybe twice, where you do the inside round and you bridge it. Now we're getting to the point in the cycle where you got to go out for outside capital. And going out to outside capital, at this point in time, you certainly have less degrees of freedom when it comes to anchoring to valuation. So terms are onerous. I think we're certainly seeing management teams having much more of an eye towards the end game than I need a 25%, I need a 50%, or I need a flat valuation on my current round. I don't know if others agree or disagree.
No, I think also we should add that the recommendation is to face it as soon as possible in the process of raising, because going out with the same valuation and the high valuation, that is just the way of killing any due diligence process. And so you don't even get a term sheet with the fair valuation, with the adjusted valuation. Just kill the process, so investors would just not even start saying, hey, this is far too expensive, even if I like and I would look into it. I just don't go, because a down round is something that they won't like, they won't vote in favor of. There is minority that can be sometimes blocking minorities that would look for additional way of raising that capital, and then you don't even start looking into it. So this frank conversation with your investors is something to have as soon as possible to enable the process and just open up at first conversation with new investors, open up and saying, well, we had a round that was overpriced. Let's just face it, and we're open to readjust this, and everyone around the table is. So you can go for your due diligence and then set a price. I think it's much better way.
David, you mentioned field of use as an option to generate non-dilutive financing. Alex, what about other types of non-dilutive options, maybe grants? Can you comment, and how do you guys look at that as investors, and what comments would you have for folks in the audience looking to raise?
No, I think grants and truly non-dilutive funding, which I would not consider to include venture debt. I'll comment on that in a second. But I think venture debt's a legitimate source of funding. I just think to characterize it as non-dilutive is misleading. But true non-dilutive funding, government grants, research grants,
many of which are available at the regional and national level across Europe. It can be great, especially at the early stages of a company, formation. The amounts that are available tend to be on the smaller side, so that can only take you so far. But the less dilution you can take, obviously, the better in terms of preserving, founder ownership. And I think kind of moreover, it's just great to get non-recourse money if you can, right? It's hard, and it will be part of an overall financing strategy. You can't completely fund a company on grant money, but it can be very helpful. In the U.S., there's probably less of it. It's really more for foundational research, NIH stuff, which doesn't really help, I think, for most of what this community is working on. But in Europe, there's quite a bit, and then there's also sort of the next level, which is state-sponsored funds that have a mandate to invest in the local ecosystem, where their bar from a financial return perspective might be different than a pure financial sponsor. And I think those are obviously avenues worth pursuing fully.
It's interesting. My next meeting after this, I serve on a board of a Swiss-based company as an independent. We have a board meeting today, and we have a term sheet from a Portuguese firm that is essentially giving us a grant for domiciling in Portugal, and we're doing that today. So it's exactly, it's non-dilutive financing, and it's a great group. And so, we're thrilled about it, and it's the lead topic at our board meeting today. So it's very real, and it's very timely that it happens to be in Portugal.
Yeah, one more source that we haven't talked about is obviously geographic distribution rights, right?
Yes.
We were.
I was going to ask David about that. It's in my notes.
No,
and I did,
sir.
so thank you for.
I was peeking over.
Thank you for correcting.
And
particularly, China rights is one thing that we see a ton of. So can you comment and your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I don't have anything. So we're actually looking at a company right now that took $25 million from a Chinese medical device manufacturer for rights. And I was describing it to one of my colleagues earlier this week as like a free round, right? Because they got $25 million is functionally a Series B financing for a lot of companies. Now, obviously, devil being in the details of what those distribution rights entail and what the implications are to, in particular, how strategics, and I don't know if we have any strategic M&A folks in the room.
We do.
It would certainly be an interesting perspective. And the lights are
seriously
bright and
morning.
hot. But that's something we all have to think about down the line as well.
I see the halo over their heads too, saving us. So,
yeah, and I think on that, one of my colleagues is in the audience. There's a structural heart company that we really like. They're on the front edge of needing $100 million. They've given off their China rights to a large China multinational, and currently trying to raise a bunch of money, and that entanglement is challenging. And so, yes, it absolutely came with some non-dilutive financing for geographic rights, but it's something to keep in mind on the back end that it can complicate things too. But if you sort of follow the first rule of, number one, do not run out of money. Regional rights are better than, a revamped cap table.
And there's some, I'm sure folks in the audience are familiar with them, but there's a couple of, specialty advisory firms that are focused exclusively on helping venture-backed medtech companies monetize, sort of non-European U.S. geographies, China, India. We're seeing, inbound inquiries for some of our companies as that emerges as a large medical device market. And I think and if there are strategics that want to chime in here, please do. But I think whereas 5 years ago, kind of in the run up to the crash or the correction, I think there's a lot of reluctance to give away China rights because a lot of strategics were looking at trying to go direct into China. Because of the geopolitical situation, I think there's much more acceptance of a well-structured China licensing or China distribution deal that doesn't impact on rest of the world.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think just real quick, I think the geographic distribution is a little more risky, and I'd be a little more reluctant to do that
Versus, say, field of use.
Yeah, field of use, because you've got stocking orders. It'll have an impact on your margin selling through them, and it's the same application, right? And so anytime a strategic is looking at you, they want to see that they can pick up your solution, drop it into their sales force, and have success with it? Can you have success with it? And if another big distributor can't in a particular market, you have to explain why. If it's a different field of use, different specialty, whole story, long story that you can tell about that. But and then the inventory, the cost to move that over and sell through to them, that's a hit on your margin and cash too. So unless you can get an upfront payment for that exclusivity, which can help drive that, it's hard to see that being a good option longer term. So
Yeah. Deanna, I want to shift gears a little bit and have you maybe give us your thoughts on team and the team required to raise money versus the team required to run the company versus the team required to get a successful exit. And how do you think about that as an investor?
Yeah. I think team are just one team, right, per company, and the level of expertise and vision will trigger both operational skill, execution, as well as more strategic and raising money alongside. But the earlier the company is, the more these are really separate skill, in my view, because at early stages, specifically the A round and B round that we lead, there's a lot to plan for, and there's a lot to execute as well. But the planning part is all to kind of figure out how it's going to look like, right? And thinking of when a product is in development, how reimbursement will look like, how market access in general, or how different markets would look like. How is Europe? There's a lot to learn, a lot to envisage, and that is a lot of vision, a lot of planning. While at the same time, of course, you have to run the company. You probably at that stage you have a small team. You don't have so many resources, and make progress. But you really have to carefully think of the funding strategy. Which one will be the steps? What will you sell to investor at each point, and which one will be next step, and the amount to raise each time, given market condition and given the difference among investors you talk to, because we mentioned some non-dilutive source of funding. We haven't mentioned the great effort that the EIB is making in Europe. That's huge. I think the number is 3.5 billion deployed through the EIC program into the European countries in the last 3 years. In deep tech in general, half of which is health tech, so half of that, and they have another 6.5 to available until 2027 for grants and equity to come alongside the investors. And I fully agree, venture debt is not the first choice for companies, but the EIB venture loan, I think it's very, very interesting. It's an exception.
That's an exception.
Because it's bullet, it's reimbursed, that exit, also, yeah.
Commission, yeah.
So, going back to management, this is for example, EIB, EIC is a completely different kind of investor to manage. Yeah. You have local investor asking for company to relocate, and you have to enter into that logic. You have strategics. You have the Chinese investor you want to deal with and see if you, or Indian investor now very active as well. You want to see if you give out rights. All of that requires a lot of. It's a puzzle you have to deal with and require a lot of work and vision and trying to find out the good fit. This is a really different mindset than executing on a plan.
Yeah. Thank you. Today's arguably one of the more important days in the last couple of years for capital markets. For those that don't know, the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to meet, widely expected to cut interest rates. Maybe it's 1/4 of a point, maybe it's 1/2 a point. In any case, we are about to see a reversal of 2.5 years of increasing rates. And so I look at today as a watershed moment that arguably will impact the next several years of the environment. And so with that as context, I want each of you to comment on two things: your macro outlook for medtech, and you can be brief on that, but maybe more importantly, your own fund and where you think your risk tolerance is today and where you think it's going over the next short period. So risk tolerance for you personally on top of the macro environment. And maybe, David, I'll start with you.
With that? Okay. All right, so the two questions, just directionally, I think things are getting better, as hard as that feels, but I don't think they could have gotten worse. I think we haven't really talked about it, but it was a correction, it was a recession, it was a deep cut and even into bone, and I think damaging for our innovative ecosystem. The correction has been over, and we see that on the software digital health side too, where we had tech investors coming in, pure tech, that didn't have healthcare background or experience and didn't appreciate the longer sales cycles and the smaller markets that we operate in healthcare, and just how slow decisions are made. And you can't just rush in and break things in healthcare. And so we have an even deeper correction on the software digital health side, which to me, I could not be more excited about the environment that we are in right now and where we are headed. I mean, I'm putting my life savings and everything I have into the market right now. I'm all in because the upside is tremendous. I think we've seen a lack of M&A, and that is the engine for innovation in the U.S. R&D for large companies. I'll continue to have a career because of, no offense to the angels in the room, but those BD, but big companies have a hard time innovating, right? And they're reliant on us to drive that innovation and growth, and there's a backlog and a need. So I think moving ahead, we are coming into a great exit environment. And so if you can find any capital and do that math on the cost, not just the cost of the capital, but the time needed to raise that and the distraction, because you'll be measured. Your exit will be measured in how you perform year over year and whether you hit plan and what you say you're going to do. If you can survive, I think you've got a unbelievable opportunity. And MedTech has just been bumping along. It's just consistent. It has a dip more recently, but there's a need and it's not going anywhere. So I think I hit your two questions at least in that.
Alex, Endeavour Vision, are you guys ready to act, ready to be more bullish, or are you still looking backwards thinking, wow, that hurt?
No, I think we see a lot of opportunity. I mean, from the macro perspective, you mentioned interest rate cuts. That's going to have, I think, a huge impact. The big question in my mind is what the stock market's going to do, because what's been weird from a traditional kind of economic cycle perspective is that the real economy has had inflation, but has had pretty full employment. The stock market remains at all-time highs.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's a little weird. It feels like the whole soft landing, has worked out, but there's always, I think there's still this waiting for the other shoe to drop. And there's a lot of geopolitical risk. Things, as many of you saw this morning waking up, have gotten even less stable in the Middle East as of this morning's pager situation. So there are some things that could have an impact on the macro climate that aren't related to the general economic cycle, but it does feel like we're turning the corner with M&A activity kind of rebounding across the board, and also more specifically within medtech. There have been a lot of big and small transactions in the last 12 months, and that's encouraging to see. There's a couple of companies that are looking to go public in the coming days, weeks, and obviously that'll be a bellwether for hopefully what we'll see as a crop of 2025 medtech IPOs, and that sort of resets the cycle. And so I think the best time from an investor perspective to be deploying capital is kind of at the bottom of the cycle. It's always hard to time it, and this one is tricky because just as the public equity markets have remained high because of that sort of internal financing round phenomenon that we talked about at the beginning of the panel, private company valuations have remained higher than you would normally see in this kind of correction. And so the put full risk on, like everything is now reset, repriced, and we can make a really nice return really quickly. I'm not entirely there yet, but I think there's a lot of attractive entry points in the current environment. And so I think we're going to see people put money to work. I think the big question, and Michael alluded to this on the pre-call, is from the fund point of view, right? This conference often talks about how hard it is to raise money as a startup. It's hard to raise money, full stop. It's hard for investors to raise money because we have investors that are, managing billions and trillions of dollars. And they're saying, hey, I can put it in treasuries at 6% and go to the beach and relax because I know I'm going to get a guaranteed return. Why would I give it to Wasserman?
By the way, it was not
Because he could screw it up, right? And in a lower interest rate environment, the potential to get a 3, 4, 5x return on your money is a lot more attractive, even though it carries risk. And so there's a whole bunch of factors that I think are going to come together here in the next 6, 12 months that should restart the cycle. And I'm hoping that we have another kind of decade ahead of us of pretty exciting times in medtech.
Yeah, I think if I can, Bill, Alex makes a great point. Blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. But
broken clock is right twice a day.
We have to remember that we too are out there begging for money all the time. And the flows into general partners, into investment partners, whether it's public or on the private side, are an important driver of our ability to deploy capital. I think all of us recognize the challenges that have been there for healthcare, medtech in particular, funds trying to raise capital in this environment. I do think that things look like they will be changing for that, which will have a trickle-down effect on the folks out here in the room. And many of us, in fact, I think all of us on the stage have been investing for long enough to have gone through these cycles before. 2008, 2009. This is not the first time we've been through this. 2001 as well. I was an operator in 2001 and remember how difficult it was to raise capital. And look, I have been woefully unsuccessful in timing markets in the past. I think we're all here in the audience and on this stage because we are bullish on the state of medical devices innovation and the opportunity it presents in the overall environment. So on all of us, the challenge is to continue to invest, to continue to put money to work, to continue to innovate and build these companies. We can't determine when the public markets will be supportive of them, and we certainly can't determine when when the strategics will be willing to buy. You build good companies, you finance them appropriately, you create value, and ultimately they will be successful.
Dan, I'm going to give you the last word here. What does the future look like for the folks in this audience that are trying to raise money?
Well, let's try to leave the floor with a little bit of optimism because the numbers first half of the year were better than last year. So that's has to be said. There's more money going into medtech, so that's good. We're positive about the IPO market providing some kind of exit possibly starting next year, maybe, and a number of earlier stage exit opportunity eventually also through M&A becoming a little bit more exciting. So let's say, I mean, be creative, look at different sources of funding, as we mentioned several times in the panel, and not the worst of times you can go through and adapt. That's probably the best word.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the entire panel. This was great, informative for me. I'm going to ask each of you to stick around a little bit. We didn't take Q&A from the audience, but if you could just stick around. If anybody wants to interact directly or ask Diana for money, she's got it, and the future looks bright. Thanks, everybody.